I Am Malala, the Girl Who Stood Up for Education and Was Shot by the Taliban, by Malala Yousafzai with Christina Lamb. Picture this, a dusty road in Pakistan and a white Toyota truck bouncing along, packed with teenage girls. They're squeezed together, exam folders pressed to their chests, giggling about school gossip, and, naturally, Justin Bieber. The plastic sheeting on the windows is yellow with dust, but through the open back, there's a slice of brilliant blue sky. Inside, it's sweltering hot, but nobody seems to mind. Among them sits a 15-year-old girl with a quick smile and an insatiable love for books. Then, without warning, the van lurches to a stop. A young man jumps onto the tailboard. His face is covered with a handkerchief. The laughter evaporates. The temperature seems to drop 10 degrees. In his hand, unmistakable and terrifying, is a black pistol. His voice cuts through the silence. "Who is Malala?" Nobody answers. But in that frozen, heart-stopping moment, every single pair of eyes turns to one girl, the only one whose face isn't covered. She squeezes her friend's hand tight. And then, crack, 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 3 shots shatter the air. That simple question, "Who is Malala?" would soon echo around the entire world. From the mountain villages of Pakistan, all the way to the marble halls of the United Nations. Today we're going to unpack the answer together as we explore one of the most remarkable true stories of our time. This isn't simply a book about a girl who got shot. It's the story of a girl who absolutely refused to be silenced. It's about a father who, in a place where baby boys are celebrated with gunfire and feasts, looked at his newborn daughter and decided she would be free as a bird. And it's about a stunningly beautiful valley that was slowly, heartbreakingly swallowed by fear. By the time we reach the end of this journey, you'll understand how a quiet, book-obsessed girl from the Swat Valley became a living symbol of peace and education. You'll discover the incredible power of a single voice when it dares to tell the truth. And you'll see that fighting for education isn't just about textbooks and classrooms. It's a fight for the very future of humanity. This is a story of courage so deep and profound, it just might change how you see your own life, your own education, and the power of your own voice. Our story doesn't start with drama or violence. It starts with a quiet disappointment. In the Swat Valley of Pakistan, a gorgeous land of cascading waterfalls and emerald fields, the birth of a son is cause for celebration. Neighbors bring gifts, there's music, there's joy. But when Malala was born, the villagers just offered sympathetic looks to her mother. "Oh, a daughter," they'd say with a sigh, as if something had gone wrong. But Malala's father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, was cut from different cloth. He was a poet, a dreamer, and above all, an educator. When he looked into his newborn daughter's eyes, he fell completely in love. In a culture where family trees traced back generations through sons only, through the male line exclusively, Ziauddin picked up a pen, drew a line from his own name, and proudly wrote, Malala. He named her after Malala of Maiwand, a legendary Pashtun warrior woman, essentially their version of Joan of Arc, who had rallied Afghan troops against the British Empire. The name technically meant grief-stricken, but to Ziauddin it meant strength and courage. He would tell anyone who'd listen, "I know there's something special about this child." He truly believed his daughter would soar free as a bird. Malala basically grew up living inside the walls of her father's school, the Hushal School. For her, school wasn't just some building where you had to sit quietly. It was her playground, her universe. Before she could even form sentences, she'd waddle into empty classrooms and pretend to teach invisible students. While other girls in her village were being groomed to cook, clean, and prepare for arranged marriages, Malala was surrounded by books and ideas. Her father's school was her birthright. The Swat Valley of her childhood was, for a while at least, genuinely paradise. People called it the Switzerland of the East, and they weren't exaggerating. Tourists flew in from around the globe to marvel at snow-capped mountains and ancient Buddhist statues carved into cliff sides. But this paradise had shadows lurking. Swat was a deeply traditional Pashtun society, governed by an ancient honor code called Pashtun Wali. This code dictated everything, especially how women should behave. Women lived in purdah, meaning they were secluded from public view. They couldn't step outside without a male relative as an escort, even if that relative was literally a 5-year-old boy. Malala witnessed this world every day, but her father had painted a completely different picture for her future. The cracks in this peaceful world started appearing in 2005. A massive earthquake devastated the region, killing over 70,000 people in minutes. In the chaos that followed, with the government basically absent and offering next to no help, new faces appeared throughout the valley. They were men from religious organizations, offering food, building temporary shelters, burying the dead with dignity. They were organized, efficient, and compassionate. People were genuinely grateful. But these men weren't just bringing humanitarian aid, they were bringing an ideology. They began preaching that the earthquake wasn't a natural disaster, it was divine punishment from God, a warning shot. Pakistan was being punished, they claimed, for all its un-Islamic behavior, the music, the dancing, the movies, and especially the education of girls. Among these new voices, one rose above all the others. His name was Maulana Fazlullah, a charismatic young man with a limp and a voice that could command a crowd. He launched an illegal radio station that everyone soon nicknamed Mullah FM. Every single night, his voice would crackle through radios in kitchens and living rooms across every village. At first, honestly, he sounded pretty reasonable. He presented himself as an Islamic reformer. He gave instructions on proper prayer techniques. He told men to grow their beards and quit smoking. He railed against government corruption. Many people, including Malala's own deeply religious mother, actually liked what they heard at first. They were exhausted by corrupt politicians and a completely broken justice system. Fazlullah promised something better, something purer. The full implementation of Sharia, Islamic law. Ironically, the women of Swat became his most devoted followers. They donated their savings and their gold jewelry, convinced they were serving God's will. But slowly, gradually, the tone of the broadcasts began to shift. The radio transformed from a voice of reform into a weapon of fear. Fazlullah started denouncing sinful activities. Listening to music? Forbidden. Watching movies? Forbidden. Dancing at weddings? Absolutely forbidden. And soon enough, he trained his sights directly on schools. He started by condemning school uniforms, declaring them un-Islamic. Then he began praising specific girls by name who had dropped out of school. Miss So-and-so has stopped attending school and will surely go to heaven, he'd announce with approval. Girls who kept pursuing education, he called them buffaloes and sheep, stupid animals. For Malala, this wasn't some abstract political issue. This was a direct attack on her father's life work. This was an assault on her entire world. Fazlullah's followers, now openly calling themselves the Taliban, weren't just preachers anymore. They were armed men, patrolling the streets with rifles slung over their shoulders. They organized massive public burnings of televisions, CDs, and DVDs in town squares. They forced barbershops to close because shaving beards was supposedly un-Islamic. They threatened women shopping in the market who weren't wearing full burqas. They had essentially become a shadow government, and the real government, the police, the army, seemed paralyzed. They did absolutely nothing. It was as if they were terrified, or perhaps, as rumors suggested, they were secretly sympathetic. Then the murders started. Bodies began appearing in the main square of Mingora, the largest city in Swat. People started calling it the Bloody Square. A dancer named Shabana was dragged from her home in the middle of the night. Her bullet-riddled body was dumped in public as a warning to others. An atmosphere of absolute terror descended. People stopped speaking out. But Malala and her father refused to stay silent. Ziauddin used his position as head of the Association of Private Schools to speak out publicly. He gave interviews to journalists. He attended seminars. He openly challenged the Taliban's twisted interpretation of Islam. He knew exactly how dangerous this was. People constantly warned him, "You're going to be next on that list." But he believed that silence was identical to surrender. He'd often say, "If you want to resolve any dispute, the very first thing you must do is speak the truth. The truth will abolish fear." And as he spoke these words, his young daughter was absorbing every single one. One day, a friend of her father's who worked for the BBC called the house. He was desperately looking for a teacher, or a schoolgirl, willing to write an anonymous diary about daily life under Taliban rule. He wanted the world to see the human face of this conflict. Several girls were approached, but their families were understandably too frightened. The risk was enormous. When Malala overheard her father discussing this dilemma, she didn't even pause to think. "Why not me?" she asked simply. And just like that, at only 11 years old, Malala began her secret double life as a writer. She was given a pen name, Gul Makai, which means cornflower, named after another Pashtun heroine from folklore. Every night, the BBC correspondent would call, and she'd tell him about her day, her fears, her hopes, the disturbing things she witnessed on the streets. He'd transcribe her words, and they'd be published on the BBC Urdu website. Her very first entry, titled "I Am Afraid," opened with these words, "I had a terrible dream yesterday, with military helicopters and the Taliban. I have had such dreams since the launch of the military operation in Swat." She wrote about hiding her school textbooks under her shawl when walking outside, about the sound of artillery shelling echoing through the night, about the oppressive fear that hung over everything like fog. But she also wrote about her absolute determination. "They can stop us from going to school," she declared, "but they cannot stop us from learning." The diary of Gul Makai became an absolute sensation. People throughout Pakistan and eventually around the world were reading this young girl's words. Nobody had any idea who she actually was, but her voice became a small, bright candle flame in a valley consumed by darkness. She was putting a human face on millions of girls being systematically denied education. In late 2008, the Taliban issued their final decree. As of January 15, 2009, every single girl's school in Swat must permanently close. Malala was absolutely devastated. How can they stop more than 50,000 girls from going to school in the 21st century, she wondered, heartbroken. The day her school shut its doors, she felt as if her entire world had collapsed. But even then, she refused to stop speaking. Her anonymous diary had awakened something powerful inside her. She started giving interviews, this time as herself, as Malala. Her face, still round with childhood, began appearing on Pakistani television. She spoke with a wisdom and clarity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education?" she demanded in one interview, looking straight into the camera, straight into the soul of anyone watching. And the world was definitely starting to pay attention. But this public profile came with a terrible price. The more visible she became, the bigger a target she painted on herself. Threats against her and her father escalated dramatically. They'd find anonymous notes left on their front gate. Leaflets were distributed around town calling her father's school a center of vulgarity and obscenity. Friends begged him constantly to just be quiet, to pack up and leave Swat for somewhere safe. But he stubbornly refused. "I cannot leave," he'd insist. "I am a tree that has grown deep roots in this soil. I belong here." Malala was terrified too, let's be clear about that. She started having vivid nightmares. Every single night before bed, she'd check and double-check the locks on all the doors and windows. She'd pray intensely, begging God for protection. She'd even imagine scenarios. What would she actually do if a terrorist stopped her on the street? She fantasized about pleading with him, saying, "Okay, shoot me if you must, but please listen to me first. What you're doing is completely wrong. I'm not against you personally. I just want every girl to have the chance to go to school." She was barely a teenager, yet she was mentally preparing herself for a confrontation most adults couldn't even imagine. In 2009, the Pakistani army finally launched a massive military operation to drive the Taliban out of Swat. For 3 brutal months, Malala and her entire family became what's called IDPs, internally displaced persons, which is basically refugees in your own country. They fled their home, along with nearly 2 million other people. It was the largest mass exodus in Pashtun history. When they were finally allowed to return months later, Mingora looked like a war zone. The streets were eerily silent. Walls were pockmarked with bullet holes like deadly acne. Her beloved school had been occupied by soldiers. They discovered bullet casings scattered across the floor and anti-Taliban slogans scrawled in marker on the whiteboards. Slowly, cautiously, life began limping back towards something resembling normality. The Taliban had been pushed out, at least from the main towns and cities. Schools reopened their doors. Malala, now a proper teenager, returned to her classes, her friends, and her ongoing friendly academic rivalry with her classmate Malka Inor for the top position in every subject. But while the open fighting had stopped, the threats absolutely had not. The Taliban were no longer a visible uniformed force, but their mentality, as her father described it, was everywhere. He called it private Talibanization, this invisible, poisonous ideology. The threats became increasingly specific, targeting those who, like him and Malala, continued speaking out. In August 2012, Ziauddin's close friend and fellow activist, Zahid Khan, was shot directly in the face while walking to morning prayers. He miraculously survived, but the message couldn't have been clearer. Everyone told Ziauddin over and over, "You're next on the list." Malala's mother was beside herself with worry. She started absolutely insisting that Malala take the school bus to and from school every single day, even though their house was literally only a 5-minute walk away. Which brings us back to that Tuesday morning, October 9th, 2012, right in the middle of school exams. Malala had stayed up way too late the night before, cramming for her Pakistan studies paper. The previous day, she'd been genuinely upset about getting just one single question wrong on her physics exam. Such a tiny thing. Such a beautifully normal teenage thing to worry about. That afternoon on the bus, after finishing her exam, she was genuinely happy, chatting away with her best friend Moniba. She was thinking about what she needed to revise for tomorrow's test. She didn't notice the young men stepping into the road ahead. She never had a chance to answer their question. The last thing she actually remembered wasn't the sound of gunshots. It was the rhythmic chop, chop, chop of a butcher severing chicken heads in the nearby market, and the drip, drip, drip of blood spattering onto the dirty pavement. When the shots exploded through the air, Malala slumped forward onto Moniba's lap, blood streaming from her left ear. The first bullet had entered just above her left eye, tunneled down the entire side of her face, and finally lodged in her shoulder. Two other girls, Shazia and Kainat, were also hit by the remaining bullets. What followed was a desperate journey balanced between life and death. Her father, hearing the horrifying news, raced to the local hospital. He found his daughter lying on a gurney, eyes closed, her long hair fanned out around her head like a dark halo. "My daughter, you are my brave daughter, my beautiful daughter," he whispered, gently kissing her forehead. The bullet had somehow, miraculously, missed her brain itself, but only barely. As it had traveled through her skull, it shattered bone into fragments, and those fragments were causing her brain to swell dangerously, life-threateningly. She was rushed by helicopter to a military hospital in Peshawar. Her father and her headmistress, Madam Mariam, flew with her. Her mother could only watch helplessly from their rooftop, lifting her scarf toward the sky and praying desperately, "God, I entrust her completely to you." In Peshawar, a brilliant Pakistani neurosurgeon named Colonel Junaid made an incredibly brave decision. To give her any chance of survival, he had to perform an emergency craniectomy, which means surgically removing a section of her skull to allow her rapidly swelling brain room to expand without killing her. He stored that piece of bone inside her abdomen to keep it sterile and alive. The operation lasted 5 agonizing hours. For those 5 hours, her parents waited in a fog of hope and despair. Malala survived the surgery, but she remained in critical danger. Her condition was still desperately serious. By now, the entire world was watching, holding its breath. Offers to treat her poured in from hospitals on every continent. But the final decision wasn't up to her family. It was controlled by the Pakistani army. 2 British doctors, who just happened to be in Pakistan for completely unrelated reasons, ultimately convinced the army chief that she needed to be transferred immediately. They warned bluntly that without the specialized neurological care available in the UK, she would likely suffer permanent catastrophic brain damage if she survived at all. And so, in the dark early hours of Monday, October 15th, exactly 6 days after she was shot, Malala was carefully loaded onto a private jet provided by the royal family of the United Arab Emirates. It was essentially a flying intensive care unit. Her father made the absolutely agonizing decision to stay behind. His wife and 2 sons had no passports, and bureaucracy moved slowly. He couldn't abandon them alone and vulnerable in Pakistan. He placed his daughter's life in the hands of a British doctor he'd only just met. Malala opened her eyes on October 16th in a hospital in Birmingham, England. She was thousands of miles from everything she'd ever known. A breathing tube inserted in her neck prevented her from speaking at all. Her vision was blurry and doubled. She had absolutely no idea where she was, what had happened, or even if she was still alive. Her first conscious thoughts were a chaotic storm of terrified questions. Where am I? Where is my father? Am I dead? Is this heaven or hell? She was utterly panicked. Using an alphabet board that nurses held up, the very first words she painstakingly spelled out were father and country. she was also worried about something very practical and very Malala: money. "My father has no money," she wrote shakily in a notebook they gave her. "Who will pay for all this treatment?" She had no idea that the entire world was now paying attention to her story. She didn't know that thousands upon thousands of letters and gifts were flooding into the hospital, addressed simply to "the girl shot in the head, Birmingham." She didn't know that a global petition in her name, demanding education for every child on Earth, had already gathered millions of signatures. The Taliban had tried to silence her voice forever, but they had accidentally amplified it to reach the entire planet. They had transformed her from a local activist into a global icon. 10 incredibly long days passed before her family could finally join her. The British government had to expedite emergency visas. When they finally walked through the door of her hospital room, she completely broke down. Despite all the pain, all the fear, all the confusion, she hadn't shed a single tear until that exact moment. Seeing their faces, she knew she was going to be okay. But they were absolutely shocked by what they saw. Her beautiful long hair had been completely shaved off for the surgery. The entire left side of her face was paralyzed, frozen. The facial nerve had been severed by the shockwave from the bullet. She couldn't smile properly. She couldn't blink her left eye. Her father, staring at the lopsided grimace that appeared when she tried to smile, said heartbrokenly to his wife, "The Taliban are truly cruel. They have stolen her smile." But Malala's spirit? Completely, defiantly unbroken. "It doesn't matter if I can't smile or blink properly," she told her worried mother matter-of-factly. "I'm still me. I'm still Malala. The important thing is that God has given me back my life." What followed was a long, painful, but ultimately miraculous journey of recovery. She endured multiple additional surgeries. One to painstakingly repair the facial nerve took over 8 hours. Another to fit a custom-made titanium plate in her skull to replace the missing piece of bone. They also fitted her with a cochlear implant to restore the hearing she'd lost in her left ear. Slowly, painstakingly, she relearned how to walk properly. She did facial exercises every single day in front of a mirror, making ridiculous expressions over and over. And gradually, bit by tiny bit, movement returned to her face. Her smile came back. Not exactly the same as before, but it came back.